Direct from 7 News headquarters, the latest on the coronavirus outbreak with Michael Usher and Melissa Doyle.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, the real impact and cost of this unprecedented health crisis is beginning to hit home.
We have Australia's most experienced and informed voices here to help you navigate these uncertain times.
In the coming hour, more kids diagnosed, are young lives at risk? A leading specialist weighs in with essential advice. Surgery/Health Minister Greg Hunt joins us to explain that. Businesses and job losses across the board, how you can get help. Flattening the curve, the Nobel Prize-winning doctor gives us his timeline. And not immune, a young man suffering from COVID-19 shares a very serious warning. That's all ahead. But first, Mel, today has seen a significant spike in Australian infection rates.
It has, Michael. It is day 61 of this outbreak in Australia, and today the number of cases nationally hit 2,426. So around the states, Queensland has jumped 10% today, up to 443 people. New South Wales, the biggest increase, up to 1,029, including a 2-month-old boy and a 7-year-old girl. The ACT is showing 44 people. Victoria now at 466. 55 new cases diagnosed today. Tasmania, 36 there. South Australia, 197. The Northern Territory, 6. And Western Australia now at 205. And if we drill down into the age groups, this is the most up-to-date breakdown that the Health Department could give us. You can see there that the largest number of patients is in the 20 to 29 bracket. So 360 people, fractionally higher than those in their 60s. But as I said, the number of children being diagnosed is also on the rise, which is a frightening reality for parents. So let's bring in Telethon Kids Institute Director, Professor Jonathan Karapidis. And Professor Karapidis, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I think all parents took a little bit of comfort when we were told that children weren't in the high-risk category. Has that changed?
No, it hasn't changed at all, Melissa. In fact, in every country that's been affected around the world, children constitute just a tiny proportion of the total cases, and certainly an even smaller proportion of the people who've got very severe disease. So we know that the latest figures I saw from the United States, for example, there were no children who were actually admitted to intensive care. So that's some reassuring news. For some reason, and we're not quite sure why, children, by and large, if they're getting infected, are not tending to get significant symptoms and certainly not getting really sick. That's true overall. There are obviously some exceptions, and that doesn't mean that every child, if exposed, will not get sick. And there are some kids who end up requiring quite intensive treatment.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully that means parents can breathe out a little bit. But, is there a case maybe, I guess our worry would be that there could be more children out there undiagnosed?
Yeah, that's true. We don't know that proportion. We know that there are certainly quite a few people out there who have very mild symptoms, or some who have no symptoms at all. In children, we suspect that the majority of them have very mild or probably no symptoms at all. So yes, that's a concern. I guess it's only a concern if those people are at risk of transmitting the disease to others. And I guess the reassuring thing again about kids, we have some early data around this, suggests that even if they do get infected, they are at very low risk of transmitting the disease to other people. So that doesn't mean that they can't, that doesn't mean no risk, but it appears that children are less likely to get sick and less likely to transmit to others.
Yeah, so obviously their little bodies react a little differently than ours. And the other thing too is symptoms. Are they the same? What do we look out for? What do parents keep their eye on?
Yeah, it's pretty much like a bad flu, so very much the same symptoms as adults are getting. So for very young kids, obviously, they don't complain in quite the same way of, for example, a sore throat. But fever, cough, sore throat are the big three that we look for. Some children are getting diarrhea as well, which is something different to adults, so that can be a symptom, but again, usually accompanied by some of those other features as well. And so it's really looking for the features of what looks like a bad flu. It's really important that people know that isolated runny nose is not a major feature of this. Runny nose can occur, but only together with some of those other symptoms. So really it's parents looking for that triad of symptoms of fever, cough and sore throat. Obviously, the ones we're really worried about are the ones who might get the pneumonia, so having trouble breathing and obviously looking very unwell. But again, the reassuring thing is that the vast majority of kids with those symptoms are not going to have coronavirus, because most children with coronavirus don't actually get really sick.
I feel like I can hear mums and dads right around the country breathing out a little bit more. Professor, thank you very much. So don't be alarmed, but we need to be vigilant. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
For more on children at risk due to COVID-19 and a new announcement that elective surgeries have been cancelled in hospitals around the country, I spoke with the Federal Health Minister, Greg Hunt. Minister, thank you for joining the latest. I'd like to ask you first to talk to parents tonight. Against early messaging, some very young children have now been tested positive, infected, and there's been a spike in young people aged in their 20s. Your message to parents and perhaps those younger people who may think that they're invincible.
Firstly, thank you for having me on, Michael. The very clear message is this is a global pandemic. No country's immune, no person's immune. To young people, it may seem that this is an old person's disease. It will affect them the most, but it can affect and lead to tragedy anywhere. Fortunately, our youngest people are less likely to catch it, even less likely to catch than the flu, and are less likely to be affected, sometimes less likely than the flu. But for people in their 20s, whether they're at a wedding, whether they're at a gathering, they can pass the infection easily, which is why we've taken these hardest of decisions to close down and stop the mass gatherings and the cafes and the restaurants, with all of the impacts on our magnificent lifestyle and all of the impacts on the livelihoods of business owners. And so these are the hardest of decisions, but they've been taken because the disease can spread and young people can be a vector for spreading to older people unwittingly, and we would put our grandparents or parents at risk, and nobody would want to do that.
I know the numbers are very low, but just hearing that there are some toddlers and babies infected today, parents are going to be concerned, aren't they?
Every parent will be concerned, and every parent will be concerned because these are their children and their loved ones, and our job as a mum or a dad is to raise these beautiful kids and to give them a full life. And we're now living together through something that none of us had ever lived through before, nor even imagined in our lives. This is something that is once in a century. So the things that parents can do to keep our kids at home, to keep everybody at arm's length, not to go out to the public unless you really have to. Obviously, for essential shopping, for medical, those that are working to do their work and to exercise, that's appropriate, but not to gather, not to do the things we do. This is a 6-month period, we believe, on our best medical advice, but if we do these things, we can save lives, protect our children, and protect our elderly and our vulnerable.
Just a brief question on elective surgeries. Today the PM announced that non-urgent elective surgeries will be suspended. Very understandable. What's the modelling, though, on the backlog that will cause? Is it your advice to those needing those sort of surgery that may not happen until next year now? And do people need to get their head around that?
So we are still allowing what are called Category 1 elective surgery and absolutely necessary Category 2 surgeries. I've been speaking just before coming to air with the major private hospitals and indeed the heads of both the day and the overnight hospital networks. We are going to work with them on a national coronavirus hospitals partnership. What does that mean? We guarantee their viability. In turn, they guarantee their capacity of keeping on the jobs, keeping on the capacity, and then thirdly, integrating into the state systems. And so that will allow surgery to continue, that will allow other items to continue. Some surgeries will have to be put back, and I am deeply sorry and apologetic about that, but that is what everybody recognises is necessary. But what we are doing is allowing an integrated system where some private hospitals might become coronavirus hospitals. Some might in fact become coronavirus-free hospitals with a focus on the vulnerable. Some might take general patients from hospitals, and some might have additional intensive care capacity. So by bringing these two systems together, we are creating a boost in the Australian capacity. It's a 6-month process, as the way we see all of these things. Viability, maintaining the capacity and the jobs of all of these magnificent nurses and doctors and orderlies and attendants, and in turn an integrated system between the state public health systems and the existing private to operate as one unit.
Just to sharpen that point briefly, you're talking about there being a segregation, which would make sense, of having hospitals geared up specifically to treat coronavirus and some being, I guess, immune from treating coronavirus patients.
Look, that is absolutely one of the possibilities, but the good thing here is that the states themselves are going to work directly with the private hospitals. In many cases, as so many viewers will know, they'll be co-located at present. Yes. Say, for example, in my home city of Melbourne, you'll have St Vincent's Public and St Vincent's Private. And to be able to break down these barriers, to operate as a single system,
right, okay,
where the health ministers and the chief health officers are able to work directly with the private sector, they can then arrange their system in a way to give maximum support, not just for coronavirus patients, but for all patients. So instead of operating hospital to hospital, one single national coronavirus hospital partnership.
A great Australian, the Nobel Prize-winning immunologist Professor Peter Doyle, told me today that he believes we may flatten the curve, flatten the mass infection rate within 2 weeks, given the measures that you've put in as a government. Do you share that optimism?
I am hopeful, and more importantly than that, the chief medical officers are hopeful that these extreme social distancing measures that we've taken of such difficult decisions with regards to pubs and clubs and sporting activities, gyms, things that are so important to so many people, they're the things which will slow the rapid infection amongst groups.
Would you agree with Professor Doyle, who we're going to talk to later in the program, that a flattening of the curve could happen in 2 weeks given the measures that are in place now?
Well, the Chief Medical Officer, Brendan Murphy, who's been drawing on the finest epidemiologists and contagious disease experts, including from the Doherty Institute, named after the great Peter Doherty, believes that these measures will have an effect.
Okay.
And whether it's 2 weeks or 3 or 4, I'm not going to make that prediction.
All right.
But we are going to continue to take these measures until that infection rate slows. They will continue to grow. I have to steel all Australians for that reality. This is a global epidemic in more than 190 countries. What is interesting is because our testing rate is on a per capita basis close to the highest in the world, if not the highest in the world, we are picking up a much higher percentage of cases than others. That's the evidence of that is that for this number of recognised cases, we have almost the lowest death rate. It's not a different disease here, it just means we're more accurate in our figures.
Yep.
Therefore, that testing regime, perhaps the broadest and widest in the world, is giving us the chance to get people early, to protect them, to get them into treatment, to give them the support that they need. So the country has been magnificent.
If coronavirus is an approaching tsunami, are we on the high ground now or still down on the beach?
No, I would say we are moving towards the high ground. What are my days comprised of? My days are comprised of making sure that we have the measures in place to keep those waters at bay, and making sure that we have the capacity to get us to the higher ground.
Okay, and last question, can we expect further lockdowns over the next few days?
Look, I'll leave that to the premiers who are following the advice. Those are the decisions that they are making. But the more we do, the more each of us does to follow the rules of hygiene, of self-isolation if you've been in contact or you're in quarantine for one of the reasons, and then of social distancing, each of us can have an impact on the great national outcome here.
Health Minister Greg Hunt, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Look, it's been a real privilege, Michael, and to everybody, it will be tough, but you can make that difference. I want to thank you and honour you and help you believe we will get through this.
The Health Minister there. Well, of course, the other big issue affecting Australians today is the rapidly escalating employment crisis. So we wanted to help guide you through what you can claim if you found out that you are out of work.
So permanent employees who have lost their jobs, as well as sole traders, casual and contract workers who've lost income due to the coronavirus, can get job seeker payments. On top of that, there's the coronavirus supplement, an additional $550 a fortnight. People on job seeker, youth allowance and parenting payments will get this, but disability and age pensioners won't.
Then there are two economic support payments worth $750 each, one paid from next week and another in July. And there's a crisis payment for people who need to self-isolate or are in really bad financial hardship. That's equivalent to 1 week of your existing wage.
And when it comes to making your claim, there's been a lot of talk about this. Centrelink is asking people not to go into the service centre unless you absolutely need to. They now want people to prove their identity over the phone and then lodge an intent claim online.
But, of course, we're hearing about people who, been kept on hold for hours and hours and hours and the website crashing due to the overwhelming demand. But Centrelink today again said that they are trying to fix all of that pretty quickly.
And in just a few hours, Queensland will close its borders to curb coronavirus infection rates. Mac Lyon is at the border town of Tweed Heads. And Mac, is there a big line up there tonight? Is there a rush to get across?
Good evening, Mel. Well, no, not at the moment. We are here in Coolangatta. A few metres that way is New South Wales, and we've actually seen a lot of locals coming down to get a snap here at the State Border Monument, a final snap on what is a very monumental day in Queensland history. At 12:01, in less than 6 hours, the border will slam shut, and it's been quite an effort to get to this stage. Police obviously only announced this yesterday, and it's been a real rush to get this all ready. Police patrol cars have already started setting up the road. They're saying they'll have RBT-style sites where they'll be checking every single vehicle coming into the state to make sure they need to be here.
Mac, how are they actually going to police it, though? It's not like there's one road in. I mean, how do they make sure that nobody runs the border sort of, 500 k's inland?
It's a monumental day, but it is a monumental task as well, as you say, Mel. There are 14 roads here on the Gold Coast alone that intersect with the border. All of those, or most of those rather, are going to have to be closed. We saw a big truck bring in orange traffic barricades this afternoon. It's understood they'll start closing those roads this evening, and then at midnight only 3 access points here on the Gold Coast will be where people can get back into Queensland on the M1 at the Gold Coast Highway and here at Griffith Street. And we understand they will be checking every single vehicle, police, and they do apologise. There will be delays. They're asking people to be patient, but they are also working on an online assessment platform that will mean that people who are exempt from being checked, who won't have to go into quarantine, can get a special pass so they can come and go as they please.
All right, that'll make working across the border a lot easier. Mac, thanks very much.
Let's go to WA now, where there's a growing cruise ship standoff. Our reporter El Georgiou joins us live just off Rottnest Island. The big ship right behind her. El, hello to you. There are now 3 ships caught up in the chaos.
Good evening, Michael. There is some chaos brewing off WA's coast tonight. This is the Artania cruise ship. Aboard this ship are 1,300 crew and passengers, as well as WA healthcare workers, after the ship's captain said that 25 of the passengers reported having respiratory issues. So they are tonight aboard and testing those passengers, all 13, not all 1,300 of them, just the 25 that reported respiratory issues for COVID-19. And we can confirm that one passenger has tested positive. But our Premier doesn't want a repeat of what happened in Sydney to happen here in WA. So none of these passengers will be coming off in Perth. Yesterday, this all comes after the Magnifica cruise ship left Perth, but we understand that ship is now turning around and is heading back for us. We don't know when it will be arriving, but on Friday the Vasco da Gama should be arriving here as well.
Yeah, I think one of
that's 3 cruise ships.
It is. I think one of those ships was rejected by Dubai and sent, so it's circling back and coming back there. But what's the plan? There's a unique one for the passengers and crew on board.
Well, we're being told that the passengers aboard this cruise ship are not going to be coming off in Perth, as I say, because they don't want a repeat of what happened in Sydney. But there are 900, more than 900 in fact, Australians and New Zealanders who will go to Garma cruise ship, that one arriving here in Perth on Friday, but we're being told that they'll actually be heading to Rottnest Island. That's one of our biggest tourist attractions.
Yeah, we're losing Elle. What she was in the middle of saying, though, is that they're... I don't... There's Elle. Let's try one more time. You're talking about them going to Rottnest Island, Elle.
Yeah, so Rottnest Island, it's one of our biggest tourist attractions. All the tourists have now been cleared off the island. It's now going to be a quarantine hotspot for people. And those 900, I think it's 905 Australian and New Zealanders, they're going to be quarantined there for 2 weeks once they arrive on Friday. All
right, bobbing up and down the boat. Elle Georgiou, thanks for joining us tonight.
Let's go inside COVID HQ, where the major decisions are being made, and across to Parliament House. Our political editor Mark Riley is with us. Mark, the blame shifting over that contaminated cruise ship, the one that Elle was just talking about that docked in Sydney last week, it really stepped up today. First up, let's have a look at what Border Force and New South Wales Health had to say.
My message is that we all have clear and distinct responsibilities at the border. It's not an amorphous concept. And we work very closely together. The decision to allow them off in relation to the health and biosecurity issue was one for New South Wales Health. Health officers, trained doctors or nurses, didn't get on board the vessel, swab passengers and take those swabs for results before decisions were taken about disembarking passengers.
The issue is, I want to be clear, those people, those cases we're reporting now were exposed on the cruise ship. There is no action that New South Wales Health could have taken to stop those cases.
Oh, Mark, seriously, it's kind of hardly the spirit of consensus we need right now.
Yeah, that's right, Mel. Finger-pointing, buck-passing, claim, counter-claim. Yeah, hardly the cooperative spirit of Team Australia we've been hearing about, is it? I thought it was interesting that after Brad Hazzard, the New South Wales Health Minister, originally accepted responsibility for this debacle, let's face it, this is a debacle, New South Wales is now blaming Border Force, and to hit back today, we didn't see the Minister, Peter Dutton, we saw the Commissioner, Michael Outram, there in his shiny uniform saying, "Nup, it was all your fault." So, he's doing this quite forcefully. It's pretty unedifying. The bottom line is that the system failed here big time, and I think what people want is reassurance that this won't happen again, and whoever was responsible is dealt with. And it's all very unwelcome for Scott Morrison too, because it spoils the image he's trying to project of all levels of government working together in a common cause, Mel.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're squabbling and saying you did it, no you did it.
Yep.
The National Cabinet's meeting as we speak. Anything we know from that as yet?
Well, we know there won't be any big sort of shutdowns along the lines of what we saw on Sunday night and last night coming from this meeting. I think those announcements were made to really shake people out of their complacency and instill a reasonable sense of urgency that this situation is quite literally deadly serious, and to treat it as such. I think that's worked. But Scott Morrison described his challenge today as saving lives and saving livelihoods, the twin objectives, if you like, of the health and the economy. So tonight there's discussion on how the states are providing online learning through their schools, including what impact that'll have on the HSC exams, which we're told are still going ahead, and other discussions about how the health systems are coping and preparing their ICUs for the surge or the expected surge in coronavirus cases. I thought it was really interesting what the Minister, Greg Hunt, was saying to Michael earlier on there. There's a sense of optimism that I haven't heard from the government before. Maybe not 2 weeks until we flatten the curve, but maybe 3 or 4. Quite optimistic. The Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, seemed pretty confident today too that the hospital system will be able to cope. And there will also be some framing tonight, discussions about what stage 3 restrictions will look like and what could trigger them. But I'm assured those further lockdown measures won't be enforced tonight. But depending on what sort of growth we see in cases over coming days, they mightn't be too far off, Mel.
All right, well, you'll let us know. Mark Riley, thank you.
New York has become one of the world's hotspots for the coronavirus, with infection rates doubling every 3 days. Australian Ryan Hamilton is one of those infected, and our reporter Denham Hitchcock managed to catch up with him, have a chat with Ryan about his experience.
I don't know exactly where I got it. I know it was roughly 12 days ago, and it's been a very rough 12 days, but I don't know exactly where I picked it up. I know there's this word going around that it's just like the flu. It's like 100 times worse than the flu, I'll tell you. You get the coughs, the fever, the chills. You get up to make a cup of tea, and then you need to rest for 3 or 4 hours. And, I'm 35 years old and healthy, so I can't imagine what it does to someone that, is a bit sick already.
So far worse than the flu. And, as men, we suffer that quite badly.
I am prone to a really bad case of the man flu at the best of times. I'm also prone to a bit of a whinge when I do get it. But this is something far worse. It's really keeping me around the park.
And are you quarantined alone there? And importantly, do you know how many people that you may have passed it on to?
I don't think very many at all. I am here alone in my apartment in New York, and I've made a conscious effort ever since I felt a little bit under the weather to stay away from everybody. So I literally haven't been outside, let alone come into contact with anyone for 12 days. So, one of the reasons I'm staying here and hunkering down, not heading back to Oz, is I don't want to risk, coughing in the wrong direction and making someone else sick. So I think that's the responsibility of anyone that does have it, is bunker yourself down and try and ride this thing out.
Did you call people that you were in contact with in the days just before you got tested?
Yeah, so I've spoken to friends and family that I was in contact with, and all so far, touch wood, all relatively okay.
That must be a hard phone call to make, to call someone that you were in contact with. What do you start that phone call with?
Well, I think ordinarily it would be, Denham, but, we're facing a reality here where, almost 400,000 people around the world have tested positive for this virus. The social stigma is not there, justifiably, because we can't be worried about, whether we've contracted it from X or Y. It's just about stopping this thing at this point. It's, as I say, I'm 35, I'm healthy, so I will recover from this thing, but I'd never be able to forgive myself if I gave it to someone who had an underlying health condition that I didn't know about.
Ryan, give us a snapshot of New York City, the city that never sleeps at the moment, almost brought to its knees.
It's a scary place at the moment, Denham. There's, there are cop cars driving around the streets telling people to go home. They've turned the biggest convention centre in the city here, the place that was supposed to host Hillary Clinton's victory party in 2016, into a army hospital. There's a lot of shops being boarded up, and it's just a scary place. But New Yorkers are pretty resilient characters. They share that trait with Aussies, and they'll get through it. They're just starting to recognise that the way that we all do that is to just stay away from each other and avoid those social contacts that we have become accustomed to.
Ryan, what would you say to Australians, particularly young Australians, about the seriousness of all this?
Just don't underestimate it. I know that Aussies have got a somewhat false sense of security at this point because it's taken so long to get there in a big way. Italy was 2 weeks ahead of the US. The US is probably 2 weeks ahead of Australia. It will get bad there. There's nothing about Oz that means that it's protected. So the only thing you can do right now is take these warnings seriously, shut the place down. I cannot stress that enough. You have to stay away from each other. The economy will recover. It's going to be tough. I know that for a lot of people. But it'll be a lot tougher if we don't take this seriously right now.
Ryan, thanks for talking to us today.
Thanks, Dan. Good to chat.
Yeah, it's a bit scary, isn't it? So isolation is obviously one of the ways that we can try and avoid it. Social distancing, we've talked about that quite a lot. But one of the other ways that is most effective to avoid catching it is to actually wash your hands properly, regularly, and with soap. So I want to show you something. Have a look. This is a molecule of virus. So see that round circle? That's the little virus there. And around it are pieces of fat and protein. And what happens is that the virus sticks easily to our hands. So if you just wash your hands with water, nothing really happens. It just simply washes off. So you need to use soap. So the soap basically comes in and dissolves and strips away the fat. So see, it pulls away, which means that the virus molecule breaks up, it's demolished, and it washes down the drain. Essentially, though, you've got to use soap. You've got to do it for 20 seconds. So you've heard the little thing. You've got to sing a song. That's the minimum for it to actually work and break down that fatty layer. That's the most important thing. The other question, too, is hand sanitizers. Do they work? Their effectiveness is diminished if your hands are greasy or dirty. Doesn't quite cut through as well. Better than nothing, obviously. But good old soap and water for a minimum of 20 seconds is the most effective thing you can do to keep your hands clean. So just
kryptonite for the virus molecule.
All day, every day.
There you go. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Still to come, flattening the curve. I'm joined by a Nobel Prize-winning Australian doctor leading the charge toward a vaccine. It's a fascinating insight. He'll give us a timeline for when we'll start to get on top of this health crisis, and it is sooner than you think.
Also, more small businesses are shutting down. We speak with one impacted tonight and we hear advice for others affected.
On a lease and out of work, we have guidance for tenants, landlords, buyers and sellers in this very unpredictable market.
What actually happens to you if you test positive? We get the answers from the nation's leading medical voices. That is all coming up next on the latest from 7 News. While stage 2 restrictions may be necessary to slow the spread of COVID-19, for small and medium-sized businesses across Australia, the impact is devastating. From tonight, all beauticians, nail salons, yoga studios and fitness centres will be forced to shut up shop for the foreseeable future. I spoke with the CEO of spa chain Endota, Melanie Gleeson, earlier to see how her staff are coping.
Well, Mel, it has been a very emotional day for us here at Endota, probably one of the hardest we've had to face. I feel relieved on one hand that our governments have shown strong leadership and made the call, but I feel absolutely heartbroken for our clients who rely on these services. And our therapists and our team at head office and our local business owners whose livelihoods are affected.
Yeah, it's your staff. I mean, clients, let's be honest, we can hold out and wait, but it's staff. What will that mean?
The majority of them are women. It's their livelihoods. It's a new world we're in right at the moment, and we are just trying to navigate our way through it.
It's probably a little early to say, but what do you do? I mean, do you stand people down? Do you say just, hang tight, we'll do our best to reopen as soon as we can? I mean, what's the message that you, and I'm sure businesses right across Australia are doing the same today?
We absolutely hope and pray that this is a temporary situation. And so for most of us, we're re-looking at how we can repurpose some of our roles. But then a lot of our therapists throughout the network, we have had to stand down with every intention of having our teams join us again when we can resume normal business. Yeah.
All the best to you, to all of your staff. Honestly, everybody is just feeling for them and so many others in the same situation. That is what's really affecting everyone right now. So, Melanie Gleeson, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, the impact on businesses and workers is unprecedented. We know that, as is the government's multi-billion-dollar aid plan. But can anything be done to stop the closures and the job losses in the face of this pandemic? Let's bring in the CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia, Peter Strong. Peter, thanks for joining us again. Companies are closing down, people are being stood down, there's a lot of confusion at the moment. The main concerns that you're hearing, what are they?
Well, the concerns are from people is for their employees. We all care for each other in small business, and we've seen the reaction from government. They've doubled New Start. They've a whole range of measures there for employees. We've got to see Centrelink get its act together, but that's good news. So when we put them off, then they're going to be looked after. But a lot of concern from the sole traders saying, what about me? I mean, I used to run a business and now it's not functioning anymore. And we're hearing for particular industry sectors. The hairdressing sector in particular has been hit really hard at the moment, and there are a lot of them wondering, what do I do? How do I do it? So we've spent a lot of time with industry associations talking to their members, but everybody's worried, as we know, and everybody's scared. And the message is, and we've seen it in your show tonight, we will come out of this. We will, and the government and industry associations and big business is focused on getting the economy happening again as soon as it can. It might take a couple of months, but the whole idea is that the small businesses can reopen if they do close and employ their people.
Just the second aid package, $66 billion, is that enough?
No, we're going to need more, and that's what we're looking at. I know England did a wage subsidy. I don't know if we need a wage subsidy, but with something like that. There are going to be quite a few people out of work, and we're saying they're displaced workers. They're not retrenched, they're not redundant, they're not unemployed. They're displaced because of a huge pandemic, and they will get their jobs back again in the main. We just have to go through this, obey what the government says, get through this. Industry is working very closely with government to solve problems that we've never had before. The workplace relations system is not standing up to this in any way, shape or form. So that's what we're doing. The whole aim, get through the health crisis, bring the economy back together as quickly as possible through small business.
All right, Peter Strong, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
This rising unemployment is causing housing stress, with thousands of Australians now unable to meet their rental payments. So let's bring in Network Finance Editor Gemma Acton. Gemma, what rights do landlords and tenants have?
Well, Mel, it's a little complicated because each state and territory has its own precise rules and timelines, but the basic principles are the same, and that's firstly that across Australia, no grounds evictions are possible. That means that a landlord can ask a tenant to leave for no exact reason. It is admittedly more difficult in Victoria and Tasmania, but still possible under certain circumstances. Perhaps for this situation, though, what's more relevant is getting rid of somebody for cause, such as not paying rent. Again, it differs from state to state, but it is possible across Australia for a landlord to evict a tenant for cause, such as not paying rent. Let's take New South Wales, for example. In New South Wales, from missing your first rental payment to being physically evicted after a court process, it can be as little as 6 weeks, which is obviously terrifying for many people when we have had such a sudden spike in unemployment, and it could take a really long time for some of these government support payments to feed through.
Absolutely. Are we expecting some rent relief?
Well, Mel, the Prime Minister has said that leases are being addressed at the national cabinet level. We don't know when we're going to hear more about that. It could be as much as a week away, I'm told, from people in Canberra. But listen, what we're hearing tenants groups really pushing for now is to put a stop to evictions in the short term. We've seen that coronavirus-related evictions have been banned in Scotland, in several US cities such as New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Then we've got the question of rent relief, which could also come up later. And look, it's very real. Again, speaking to some tenants groups today, they said they've had a flood of calls, people saying they're sleeping in their cars, moving in with family, which is obviously not ideal to move into an overcrowded household while there's a health crisis going on. And so we really do need some solutions soon.
Oh, yeah. The other thing then is the real estate market. What's expected to happen there over the next 6 months, especially when you hear that they've banned open houses and all the changes there?
Yeah, Mel, look, it's an industry that's very nimble and it adapts well, and they're certainly set up to do a lot digitally, so you can do virtual tours, you can do online auctions, you can sell by private treaty, you can still have one-on-one private inspections. So certainly the real estate market is able to function despite these new restrictions. The question is who wants to buy and sell in this climate. I imagine anybody who doesn't have to sell at the moment will probably take a step back. We will unfortunately, I'm sure, see some forced sellers who do have to put their home up for sale at a time they don't particularly want to. And on the other flip side of that is seeing opportunistic buyers who do have the means to step in and buy something at this point.
All right, Gemma, thank you.
Just on the issue of jobs that we were talking about before, I want to, before we go to the break, just show you something that really struck a chord with us today. It's been a very hard day for Virgin Australia staff. 8,000 of them stood down without pay. Almost all the flights suspended, 100 planes grounded. It's a great clip, this. Have a listen to the New Zealand-based cabin supervisor, Cassie Appleton. They were going back from Sydney to New Zealand today, and what she told passengers on her last flight.
Welcome to Dunedin, everyone. There's every chance possible this could be our last operating flight, and most certainly is the last for the foreseeable future.
Remember that tough times don't last, tough people do. We're all in this together. So, on behalf of Captain Alistair Marshall, First Officer Craig Dixon, your cabin crew, Ella, Jenny, Hannah, myself, and the entire New Zealand network, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. We truly hope to see you in the sky again soon. Kia kaha.
It was just... It was heartbreaking to start. I mean, Cassie's one of the 8,000 who, look, if they get back on their feet, she'll get a job back, but no pay, no future. I mean, it doesn't know what is going to happen right now.
I don't know how long it's going to be. There's just, I think we're all...
One of the many, many, many who's losing her job right now. All right. Still to come, sudden loss of smell and taste, what's behind the new coronavirus symptom, and how we can test for it.
The expert pushing for smartphone tracking to enforce self-isolation in Australia.
And we talk to the Nobel Prize-winning Australian doctor at the forefront of the vaccine race. Professor Peter Doyle gives us his prediction for when the infections will slow, flattening that curve.
And that is all coming up next on the latest from 7 News. Australia has launched new strategies and restrictions in the battle against COVID-19. So let's bring in our panel of experts tonight. Infectious disease physician Sanjaya Sananayaka and advisory member of the World Health Organization, Mary Louise McLaws. Thank you both. Sanjaya, I'll start with you. The alarming thing tonight we've been talking about is 2 children contracting coronavirus in New South Wales. That means there's 3. Parents are just obviously worried. Were we a little complacent thinking that children were safe?
Oh, look, it's only natural as a parent to be worried if your child gets sick, and particularly with a new infection like COVID-19. Look, what I would say is that there was a Chinese study which looked at 171 children with COVID-19. They found that fever and cough were the most common symptoms, although they were much less common in adults, and also a red throat. But the most important thing was that they had a much milder illness than adults. Hardly any of them got very sick. In fact, 1 in 6 didn't have any symptoms at all. So obviously none of us want to get COVID-19, but if you had a choice of getting it as a child, a young adult or an older person, you'd probably want to get it as a child.
Yeah, but you also then worry if the 1 in 6 don't get symptoms, are they going to pass it on? But I also want to ask you, we talk about symptoms. Can you explain what actually happens when someone is diagnosed with coronavirus?
Yeah, sure. So if someone, for whatever reason, symptoms or an exposure history, has been tested for coronavirus and the test comes back positive, now if they're at home, they will most likely get a phone call from a public health unit informing them of the result and asking them how they feel, and they will particularly be concentrating on their breathing and temperature status. And if they feel fine, they'll be asked to monitor themselves at home. Now, if this person gets worse, they get more short of breath, or they start to get high fevers, then they'll be asked to come to hospital, and they'll be put, hopefully, if they're not too sick, in a non-intensive care ward where some blood tests will be done to test their baseline organ function, their liver and kidneys, their blood counts, and some of which can help us prognosticate about how the illness might go. They might even get some medication, although there's no approved treatment as yet for COVID-19. And if the breathing supports on the wards aren't enough, then they will end up going to intensive care where they may need a tube to help them breathe. And at the end of all this, once they're recovering from the illness, we're seeing a lot of states and territories trying to adopt a Medi-Hotel plan where people who don't need to be in hospital but are still recovering from COVID-19 might go in a supervised facility till they completely get better.
It's interesting, isn't it? Greg Hunt was also talking earlier about specific hospitals dealing with coronavirus patients and ones being coronavirus-free. So there's advancements happening about how the hospitals deal with this as well. Mary Louise, let me ask you, you strongly believe that Australia needs to track people's smartphones to enforce self-isolating. It's been working in other parts of the world. How realistic is this here in Australia?
Oh, look, it's really very realistic, Michael. Most of us have a phone. If we don't have a phone, the authorities can give them a phone. In Singapore, they ring up the person under self-isolation and they make them put their phone on FaceTime to ensure that they are where they're supposed to be. They get random calls. Occasionally, they might get a knock on the door to ensure they're there. Hong Kong is now introducing a bracelet because they've had SARS. They know how important it is to ensure that if you're asked to be in isolation, you actually stay there. Tonight we heard about one person causing multiple infections, and if you are asked to be in isolation, you're asked for a very good reason so that you don't unwittingly give it to multiple people. So we can do this with simple technology that we already own in our pocket.
And Mary Louise, today, a lot of leading scientists issued a press release saying that the health authorities here should be sharing more detailed information and data with the Australian public. Would you support that?
Absolutely. The Australian population are very clever, And the more data that you give them, the more they'll understand the rationale for some of the decisions being made. So people need to know, where are the cases? In Hong Kong, they're developing GIS mapping, geospatial information maps and analysis, where people can actually see where a case has been. Now, it's granular, so there is anonymity there, but then people understand why they're being asked to stay indoors, why they're being asked to hand hygiene, and why they're being asked to keep good cleanliness around the house and in public. So it is done, and it's a great idea, because I think that the public are a little confused, and the more information you give them, the better.
Sanjay, can I ask you just briefly, on Monday night you were talking that the loss of smell and taste could be a symptom, and since then there's been a lot of talk about it and spike in cases experiencing it. Is it as simple as somebody going home and, say, opening a piece of blue cheese in their fridge and having a sniff and maybe testing yourself that way?
Yeah, look, some lemon, some vinegar, some blue cheese, that may be all you need to do. And in terms of your taste as well, something sweet, salty, bitter, and see if that tastes as it should.
Okay. Yeah, Mary Louise, one last question for you, if you don't mind. The World Health Organization, WHO, meeting later tonight. You're a part of that. Can you give us some insight into how often and what's discussed during these meetings, particularly during a pandemic?
Look, we often have meetings twice a week or even more, depending on the change in the pandemic. And tonight we'll be talking about the real possibility of some countries not being able to offer healthcare workers enough personal protective equipment, and we'll be discussing as a group how best to address that. So yes, we meet often on emergency decision making.
A lot to talk about at the moment. All right, Mary Louise and Sanjay, yes. Thank you both so much again. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Stay well.
Indeed. Well, still to come. When are things going to get better? We dive into the numbers to give us a sense of what is to come.
Plus, we talk to a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Peter Doyle, the man working to flatten the curve.
And inside a beloved business facing a real serious problem, how Meals on Wheels is dealing with the COVID-19 health crisis. Well, coming up next, here on The Latest from 7 News.
Well, if there is one question that's being asked more than any other right now, it is, when are things going to get better? So tonight we have a special edition of The Curve, and senior reporter Denham Hitchcock joins us now. Can we really answer that question?
Seems impossible, doesn't it? But I think we can, by making some predictions about our curve, Australia's curve. So, this is the graph we know so well by now. Since 100, here are the countries: Australia, South Korea, Italy. Now, so this is where we look into the future to find out where this curve should start to flatten out, thanks to the harsh new rules of self-isolation. Our total number of people infected is actually much higher than it is right now, because it takes 5 days for the COVID test to come back. 2 days for fast track, but the majority is 5 days. So, on our current trajectory, right now, we are really about there, where it says 5 days. Now, we need to add another 6 days to that to account for the incubation period. Now, that will cover the people who are sick but who have not yet been tested. So the answer is roughly 11 days from now, if we all follow the guidelines. We should start to see that curve flatten out. So that's about 2 weeks to see a result, Michael. We can do that.
I think we can, Denham. There's no doubt about that. And our next guest has been dealing with all of those big issues. When will the curve flatten out? When will we get a vaccine? Do we need to go harder? His name is Professor Peter Doyle. He won a Nobel Prize in Medicine for his work on the immune system, and I spoke with him earlier. All right, Professor Doyle, thank you for your time. May I ask you first, what is your research and read of it telling you about our current trajectory for infections in Australia?
Well, the current trajectory for the COVID-19 is that it's going up a lot faster than we'd like, but we haven't had time for the new control measures that have been announced by the Prime Minister to cut in. because there's always a lag phase.
Yeah.
And what we'll be watching is what happens over the next couple of weeks.
We keep on talking about the curve of COVID, but the time frame is we're going to have to wait a few weeks. Is that exactly how long, or is there a better measure of between the measures being introduced, the more and more self-isolation, and seeing the effects of it?
Look, we're in uncharted territory for Australia, definitely. We've seen the effect of what was done in Washington State in the United States. That's flattened the curve a lot. The Governor, Jay Inslee, closed down all schools and all public venues and so forth. Much the same thing we're doing here, though they maybe went a bit further with schools. But now, in Victoria, at least, schools are closed for at least the next 3 weeks. So we should see that full effect.
So do you see a little bit of hope in that example of what they did in Washington State and Australia? Same measures that in a matter of weeks it could flatten?
Absolutely. The only advice that's worth giving to people at this stage is actually think that you've got the infection and you don't want to transmit it to everybody else. And if you think like that, you'll maintain that social distance and you'll protect yourself.
And with these measures, just to underscore that point, that could happen in weeks if everyone's strict and adhere to what the government's suggesting.
I would think that we will see change in 2 to 3 weeks.
Your institute was the first lab outside of China to decode the COVID-19 virus, understand it. Let me ask you a question then about a vaccine, which is what everybody wants to know. Realistically, how far off?
Look, it's a bit of an unknown. We are aware that there are many vaccines under development over the world. The first COVID-19 vaccine has already gone into people's arms in Seattle. We have a vaccine that's being rapidly progressed. It's from the University of Queensland, Paul Young's group. It uses a very novel technology. And that's currently, batches of that vaccine are currently being produced by the CSIRO, and tests are already being done in lab animals, and it's looking good so far, but it's very early days.
So how important then is it to find a test then for antibodies? And if you could explain that, because that's important to find out who may have had it, who may not have felt symptoms, but then to the point of immunity after that.
So what's being attempted at the moment, and there's a lot of work going on, is to develop a pinprick screening test where you can just, instead of bleeding someone, you can just prick their finger, take a little bit of blood, test for antibody.
So that's fascinating. That's creating a serum or taking a serum from them who've been through it, survived, and using it as another preventative measure for people before they may get infected.
This is actually the first immunotherapy. We've been doing this since 1900.
This isn't a terribly scientific question for you, Peter, but given your experience, if there was a scale of fear right now and concern, where would you sit on it in relation to this outbreak?
Look, it's the biggest infectious disease problem we've had since the 1918-19 influenza pandemic. With this one, we have the virus immediately. We're going straight to a vaccine. We've never moved this fast on anything.
Professor Peter Doyle, terrific to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Bye.
And I want to show you something New South Wales health authorities started today. It breaks down the hotspots of confirmed cases across areas of the state. Now, you can see today there are clusters in northern Sydney and the city's southeastern beaches. The biggest area was Wollongong with 34 locally transmitted cases. And there's been a push for authorities to release more specific data like this and nationally as well. It's just the first time we've seen where most of the cases are.
Well, still to come, Meals on Wheels has been lending a helping hand for 60 years. Well, now it's facing its biggest challenge.
That story and more coming up next here on the latest from 7 News.
Well, the number of businesses affected by this virus is impossible to count, but one is particularly vulnerable, and it's the focus of tonight's COVID Diary segment.
And Denham Hitchcock is back with all of this. Denham, what did you find?
Well, Michael, it's a unique business, not only due to the service it provides, but because of the age of its clients and its staff. The group is called Meals on Wheels. It's been around for more than 60 years, but its drivers are facing their toughest challenge yet.
My name's Bill. I'm 67, retired. Been doing Meals on Wheels for about 4 or 5 months. These people are often fairly immobile, can't get to shops, got no one to do their shopping for them. Often it's the only time they see someone per day. G'day Cliff, Meals on Wheels. After a while you get to know a few of the clients. It's nice to do that, just to spend a few minutes with some of these people.
Thank you, mate.
Good on you, mate. All the best. Most of the drivers are my age or older, but obviously the clients are older still. How are you, Dave? All right, son. And often have significant other medical conditions which make them more vulnerable to, for instance, the coronavirus. Meals on Wheels, sweet, okay? So we've got to be a little bit more careful, not too much contact or no hand contact, hand hygiene, cough etiquette, and in general keep a social distance from people, but at the same time, no worries. Have a good day, sweet, no worries. You be good.
And this is no small organisation, almost 55,000 clients in all states and territories waiting each day, Mel, to hear that doorbell ring.
Oh my gosh, I hope everyone stays safe. Thank you. Thanks, Dannon, very much. Well, we will be right back with your Thursday weather forecast on the latest from 7 News.
Welcome back. Because we can't travel, we're going to try and show you as many travel shots around the world of the places you can't get to at the moment. But there's a shot of the normally packed Positano on the Amalfi Coast, absolutely deserted, as it should be, listening to the strict messages in Italy. We'll look at the temps around our country now and leave that shot up. Brisbane, 28, possible shower developing. Canberra, 21 and cloudy, 21 and sunny in Melbourne.
And in other parts of the country today, Bowen 31 and sunny, Newcastle 23 with a few showers, and Karratha 40 degrees and sunny. I feel like today, in all of the stats and the fear and the uncertainty, there was a glimmer of hope.
Tiny shift, wasn't there?
Yeah.
We heard some optimism from the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, some optimism from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer in saying that, yes, the infection rates are rising, but the critical remains small. Only 8% of people had to go to... Only 17 people in ICU, 197 people hospitalised. So it's OK, but we may still be nowhere near the bad bit of the curve, although we did hear from Professor Peter Doherty saying he believes if we stick to all these government measures, stay inside, stay isolated, do everything we can to stay hygienic, that it could just be a couple of weeks before that trajectory turns into that which matters.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Thank you for your company this evening. 7 News, of course, will keep you informed throughout the night with a special bulletin coming up a little later. You can rewatch all of our shows on 7+. For now, though, from the team here at 7 News, that is the latest. I'm Michael Usher.
And I'm Melissa Doyle. Good night.